I haven't been back to Europe in many years, and this summer in 2025, I spent an unforgettable week in the nation of Denmark, which may very well be one of Europe's finest nations and Copenhagen one of our most beautiful capitals. I will remember it most of all for its picture-perfect buildings, sustainable tap water, delicious pastries, walkable streets, fascinating history, ever-changing spirit, the gardens, and last but certainly not least, the beautiful people. Let's go! Welcome to day 1 in Copenhagen, or as we shall call it going forward by its proper name, København. On our first night in the city, we discovered to our excitement that in what is clearly a modern European city, København is extremely walkable. Every part of the city is in easy access, and if you're not walking, you can rent a bike or take the train. This is the Palace Cinema Theatre. Before becoming a movie theatre in 1912, it was København's original Grand Central Railway station. Our hotel was located along Gammel Kongevej, the Old King's Road, an area dating back to centuries in the city's history. It is now marked by København's Planetarium and the lakes, which you can pass on your way to other parts of the city. A distinctive part of the landscape is the graffiti art, which you can find everywhere in the city. We also enjoyed the domed industrial street lighting. You know you're in the city center when you see Rådhuspladsen. From there you can see Tivoli and København's other attractions. København's City Hall was originally built in 1905, and it is a stunning work of construction. If you recognize the architecture from Italy, you're right, it was inspired by Siena's City Hall. As we journeyed into the city center, signs promoting København's August Grand Prix immediately caught my eye. A Burger King joint, and a few quaint shops amid all the tourism boutiques. We ended up walking by the main building of København University, which was founded in 1479. Niels Bohr, København's first citizen and famous physicist, is one of several key Danish figures who is featured on a bust. Bohr famously said, "If you're not feeling dizzy, you have not understood quantum mechanics." Continue walking up Fjellstræde and you will pass København's synagogue, which became a flashpoint during the Nazi occupation of Denmark. The night ended with us trying Denmark's famous open-faced sandwiches. Our second day started with a walk along the Østersøgade district. Crossing the bridge, we arrived at the Niels Bohr Institute. Denmark played a seminal role in the quantum revolution of the 1920s, and the Institute for the Study of Theoretical Physics was at the center of it all. The name of Niels Bohr should be famous. He published a critical thesis on the electron theory of metals in 1911 before going on to study in Manchester with Ernst Rutherford. He pioneered the Bohr model, one of the most fundamental principles we have today surrounding what we know about the nucleus and the quantum behavior of electrons. All data that led to the Manhattan Project. He attended the Solvay Conference in 1921 alongside other physicists like Albert Einstein, and he received the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1922. The institute Niels Bohr founded became a safe space for the most diverse minds and personalities in the world. In the same way Bohr visited academic institutions like Göttingen in Germany or Japan and China in 1937, the institute was international, with students from Japan and China, and even Germany, which had been very much socially ostracized in the academic world since the First World War. To Bohr, opposites were complementary, borders were open, international collaboration crucial. He saw everyone as collaborators, The question wasn't where are you from, but can you do the science? As fascism took root in Germany, Bohr's philosophy came into practice. Denmark became a haven for scientists seeking refuge from the Nazi occupation. Bohr collaborated with officials from the Rockefeller Foundation in New York to get scientists out of fascist-controlled countries so they could live, study, and do their work in peace. Hilde Levy, the last Jew to study at the Keiser Institute in Germany before the National Socialist Party closed the door to Jewish attendance, proved invaluable here, with one of her finest achievements being the pioneering of carbon-14 dating. Germany occupied Denmark in 1941 and began rounding up Jews there in 1943. Despite no longer considering himself a Jew, Bohr fled to Sweden alongside many of the staff and students here during what can only be called one of the greatest escapes in World War II. In a nation where the Jews had very much been welcomed with open arms, the Danish people aided their entire Jewish population in escaping to neighboring neutral Sweden. They returned after the war, and class was never dismissed again. Niels Bohr would become one of Denmark's most important children and would have the same prestige and fame internationally as the royal family. At the height of the Second World War, he importantly foresaw the arms race that would come to dominate our times and pushed for openness, expressing the belief that the British and Americans should let the Russians in on the secret of the atom bomb. Although Niels Bohr failed to forestall the Cold War, he remains an example of peace and the power of human intellect in a shared world with open learning. I highly recommend coming here. Groups tend to be small, and the curator Robert Sutherland is the most knowledgeable person you could meet. Copenhagen is very much a city where history and culture meets in the middle. Go to the district of Nørreport and see what I mean. In the case of Rådhuspladsen, it has been settled as far back as the Middle Ages, but it only really picked up in the 19th century. I visited this street to see where the famous Danish filmmaker Carl Theodor Dreyer lived. Located conveniently close by is the Danish Film Institute Cinematheque building. I couldn't spend a lot of time here, but it offers a selection of curated films and a library as well. After our visit to Rosenborg of the same day, we had an early dinner here at Torvhallen Market, smørrebrød and ice cream. I also had the tastiest kanelsnegl. Torvhallen Market is a paradise for foodies. The fact locals come here is a plus. I didn't take a lot of footage of them, but you can tell they were locals. Huge props for the Danish people here. They were super friendly. One of the greatest testaments to the grandeur of Denmark's rich history is the Kongens Have, the King's Garden. Originally created in 1606, the garden's avenue of trees and pristine gardens date back to the Renaissance and are a popular destination today. Take a walk through Denmark's first royal garden before visiting the garden's most prominent centerpiece, the Rosenborg Castle. Be prepared to wait because this is one of the most popular destinations in the city. The most famous of Denmark's monarchs is Christian IV, who ruled Denmark for nearly 60 years back during the Renaissance. He belonged to the House of Oldenburg, a royal dynasty from Germany that settled in Denmark in 1448 with the first Christian. Pretty much all of the kings of Denmark have been named Christian. There are also the Frederiks, but they have their own story. Rosenborg Castle was used by the Danish royal family until around 1710. It would then be converted into a museum in the mid-19th century, which allows us to go on a journey down the history of Denmark's kings and queens. Denmark would reach its apex under the reign of Christian IV. Aside from fathering a massive progeny, Christian IV left a significant mark on 17th century Denmark by engaging in a series of massive building projects. In 1624, Rosenborg Slot was completed, and it would henceforth be his favorite palace. Christian was also a warrior king. In one nasty naval engagement during the Torstenson War, Christian IV was wounded in 13 places and blinded in one eye. He continued to lead his men. In 1625, he intervened in the 30 Years' War, hoping to make Denmark a champion of the Protestants. but he was soundly defeated by Catholic forces of the Holy Roman Empire. This room is a reminder of the role Denmark played in Scandinavia through the centuries, as a warrior nation and as a colonizing power. King Frederik III of Denmark, Christian IV's heir, was responsible for the room as we see it today. On the walls, we can see the coats of arms of Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. Between 1397 and 1523, the three kingdoms were united in the Kalmar Union, a defensive pact formed between them and under the reign of Denmark's queen, Margaret I. It prospered for a time, but it collapsed within a generation of Margaret's death. The three Scandinavian kingdoms were ever since locked in centuries of unstable relations and often war. Except as Sweden and Denmark became stronger, Norway grew weaker. The metaphorical child caught between the separating couple in a custody battle. In 1537, Denmark swooped in for the kill, absorbing Norway into the realm of Denmark-Norway. Denmark was Norway's overlord in every way possible, culturally in the sense that the Danes built cities there, militarily in that the people of Denmark had to swear to defend the Danish king's right to rule Norway, financially in that Norway's income went to Copenhagen, and spiritually in that the Norwegians lost their archbishoprics and were barred from even having their own translation of the Bible, while the Danish Lutheran Church expanded. Things weren't any better in Denmark. In 1665, Frederik III was the first Danish king to introduce the principle of an absolutist monarchy and hereditary monarch in Denmark, and every one of his successors had to measure up to that example. This contest between the nobility, the king, and the everyday people of Denmark would be most pronounced in the 18th century during the tumultuous reigns of Christian VII, who was abused as a child and suffered from mental illness, and his son Frederik VI, whose childhood wasn't any better. Frederik sought absolutist rule, and his reign commenced brilliantly with a bloodless coup and the issuing of the agricultural reform laws. But in the face of growing upheaval in the 1790s and the French Revolution taking place outside his borders, Frederik passed the Print Freedom Law of 1799, completely forbidding all criticism of the king, absolute monarchy, and of the government. So poorly did he navigate the waters of diplomacy and war during the age of Napoleon that the British successfully bombarded and destroyed much of Copenhagen under his watch. At the same time, Karl Johan XIV of Sweden claimed Norway as his prize and successfully negotiated its handover. The tale of Denmark's absolute monarchy would come to a pivotal climax with Frederik VII, who signed the Danish constitution, establishing a parliament and making the nation a constitutional monarchy. Although the lessons of oppression, absolutism, and war without end ring the truest in places like Rosenborg, it's all forgotten when visitors come here. After all, it's hard not to be impressed when you ascend the palace stairs into rooms like the Knights' Hall, with tapestries lining the walls and silver lions guarding the king's throne. Fleeting as Denmark's power was in the pages of history, it remains immortal in this palace. Rosenborg is where the Danish crown treasury is kept. Items of such significance and value to the Danish crown are stored here. Not to mention the only crown jewels in the world that are both on display as museum artifacts and worn by the country's sitting queen during formal functions. Quite fittingly, you will find the centerpiece of the collection at the end of the museum. They are the crowns of Christian IV and Christian V. Each crown is designed with exquisite beauty and reminders of the king's duties to the realm. It's all so intoxicating, yet stifling. The legacy of Denmark's military history and Christian IV lives and breathes in the city today. From the housing district for Navy personnel built during his reign to the defensive fortifications he invested in. The citadel, the Kastellet, is the most well-preserved star fort of its kind in the Nordics, and it was vital in the days of Christian IV and his successors when war was always around the corner. Completed in 1626, with further work done by Dutch siege engineers, the Kastellet was paid for with 3 years' worth of taxes on silk and salt, and successfully weathered a significant Swedish attack on Copenhagen in 1659. The German physician Johann Strunze, who also ruled Denmark between 1770 and 1772 as a progressive dictator, was imprisoned here before his execution. Designed with lower but thicker ramparts and encircled by moats, these forts allowed defenders easy access to and from the different sets of bastions, while simultaneously protecting them from enemy bombardment. Incidentally, Kastellet remains an active military base and is a site for important military ceremonies, so when you visit, please be respectful. Venturing away from the fortress, we arrive in the charming waterfront of Copenhagen. Arriving at Rådhuspladsen, it was hard for me not imitating the dance Mads Mikkelsen did in Thomas Vinterberg's film Another Round. Let's walk on.
Fra Shanghai og til KöIn. Nu har solen gule unger i hver skimlet regnværspyt. Alle havnens søde piger drikker forårskud.
There's a delight to Nyhavn. The name Copenhagen means merchant's harbor, and Nyhavn evokes that identity. As late as the 20th century, Nyhavn was known for the rough and tumble sailor's life. Cargo ships docked here in the canal, and sailors dropped off their catches from the herring fisheries, had a drink at the tavern, and engaged the nearest prostitutes before going back to sea. The quite sociable Crown Prince, Frederick IX, who had served in the Navy, was quite popular here because he often came to drink with the everyday people of Copenhagen. On our third day in Copenhagen, we took a trip into the heart of Denmark. Our first destination is Jelling in Jutland, and the second, Odense in Fyn. I suggest buying tickets through the DSB app. It takes some time getting used to Denmark's train system, but once you figure it out, it's your best friend. One rule of thumb is that the time indicated on the app and the announcement boards are the departure times, not the arrival times. Denmark is defined by its flat landscape and access to the sea. Each city in Denmark is no more than 4 kilometers from the ocean, and Denmark thus profits from its combined resources from the ocean and cereal production. Because of this geographical context and its close proximity with the rest of the European continent, Denmark also developed its national identity far sooner than the rest of Scandinavia. Germany, for instance, is right on Denmark's southern border, and the two countries share an extensive history dating back as far as the Viking Age, all the way through Denmark's long ties to Schleswig and Holstein. The transit system here is really advanced. We got off the train at Vejle and boarded a neighboring train at another platform. It's about 10 more minutes to Jelling. A town with 4,000 inhabitants, Jelling has gained recognition worldwide as the site of Denmark's birth certificate, the Jelling Stone of Harald Bluetooth. The site features 2 burial mounds, one of which yielded the discovery of a silver cup, 2 runestones, and a church later consecrated by Harald. Between the 3 sites, we can witness the evolution of Denmark as a political state, as a religion, and as a people. Gorm was technically the first king of Denmark, but it was his son Harald who inherited the region of Jutland from his father and expanded it into the rest of Denmark. Besides carving his bloodline into the stone, a bloodline that still exists today, Harald gave Denmark a new identity as far as land and religion. Although Harald Bluetooth's reign was short and ended bloodily, his definition of the word Denmark in Danish would survive for centuries to come. From Jelling, we hopped back on the train and made a stop on our way back to Copenhagen at Odense, the third largest city in Denmark and perpetually known as the home of Hans Christian Andersen.
Yes.
On the way to his birthplace, museum, and childhood home, we walked by the cathedral. It is also known as St. Knut's Church. Knut IV was famous for expanding the powers of the monarchy in the church during his reign, and he had intended to launch an invasion of England. But in 1086, he was slain here in this very church by rebels. For whatever reason, closing hours for Hans Christian Andersen's childhood home are earlier in the summertime than they are for his museum. So after we arrived at the museum early, we had a quick walk to his house. The museum is small but features a well-organized exhibit on Hans Christian Andersen's childhood, his imagination, the impact of his father's death, and the foundation for his career as a writer. The garden exhibit is particularly good in that everywhere you walk, you will find stanzas from Hans Christian Andersen's poems. Newsflash, Hans Christian Andersen was a brilliant poet. Blending exhibits for kids with artifacts from this extraordinary man's career, it showcases how crucial he was as an ambassador of Denmark and as a writer-artist. Hans Christian Andersen's full career is put on beautiful display, and as a basic novice on his life story, it was remarkable learning how much of a well-traveled artist he was. He traveled all over the world, made new acquaintances, and absorbed everything he saw and touched. His stories break boundaries. He often fell in love, but he never married, and his feelings were unrequited. He wrote opera librettos, like Lied and Kirsten, the one you're hearing now. He delighted children and even queens with his paper cuts. Near the end of his life, in 1873, Hans Christian Andersen made this beautiful folding screen. If you look closely, you will recognize figures of cultural and historical significance, thus pointing to how much Hans Christian Andersen had learned and seen in his wonderful life. I haven't heard any of Hans Christian Andersen's stories since I was a child, but I knew I had to visit the museum of his birth and maybe resurrect my childhood fantasies. I came away from the museum feeling invigorated and desiring to revisit his works. He was truly kissed by the angels, as one of the exhibits claims. We made sure to walk by the Odense Theater before going back to København.
Next station is Copenhagen Central Station, and this will continue to Copenhagen Airport. From Central Station, there is a connection to Helsingør from track 4. As trains depart from.
On our fourth day in Denmark, we took a trip to Helsingør and also across the Sound to Sweden. The shell house was the site of the Gestapo headquarters in København. It would be bombed by the Royal Air Force on March 21st, 1945. It is about an hour's drive to Helsingør, and along the way, Mario told us interesting facts about the different sites and cities we'd pass. The site of København's old walls, few of which remain today, the old location for Tuborg's breweries, Denmark's national beer in Hellerup. This is the Embassy District, and an old fort that was used by the Danish resistance in World War II. Mario told us that Copenhageners often come out to the beaches here and jump into the cold water during the cold days of winter. Apparently it's good for you. The Vikings certainly thought so. And we passed by the house of the famous Danish writer Karen Blixen.
This is the house when she wrote most of her work and she died. Well, she died. She's buried in the middle of the garden under that tree.
Sorgenfri is another residence of the Danish royal family. And in forests like Lavskov, Danish Jews found safe refuge with the help of the Danish resistance prior to escaping to Sweden. The small town of Humlebæk prides itself on its historic cinema, which shows new international films here ahead of all other movie theaters in Denmark. Throughout the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, Helsingør was defined by its shipyards and, most of all, Kronborg Castle, which protected the Sound and collected tolls. In the 1420s, Eric of Pomerania, the heir of Margaret of Denmark, established a fort here by the name of KöIn. A new Renaissance palace was built here in the 16th century by Frederick II of Denmark, who wanted to present himself as the most powerful king in the north. Not to mention, in 1572, this was his wedding gift to his new queen Sophie. Their relationship is remembered as one of the happiest royal marriages in Europe, and together they became the parents of Denmark's most famous king, Christian IV. The palace burned down in 1629. Apparently that's what happens to palaces a lot. Only the chapel remains from that time. In 1772, King Christian VII's wife, Queen Caroline Mathilde, was accused of committing adultery with Johan Strunse. She was put under house arrest in Kronborg, before being banished to Germany. Frederick II surrounded himself with artists and scientists and hosted the most lavish banquets and festivals here in the ballroom. These were big events, with dinners often dragging on for over 9 hours at a time and 50 dishes cooked. Stories about these events would pass on through the generation until they inspired William Shakespeare to write Hamlet. As we went down to the casemates, we passed by their inner curtain wall, which dates back to the 1420s. It's the oldest section of the palace. But it was the tunnels that were the true highlight of the experience at Bohr. Between hitting my head on the back of a column, almost tripping on some stones, and the cold damp air, you feel like you were in a castle dungeon where soldiers used to live and walk. Holger Dansk continues to stand vigil, sleeping as he waits to come to Denmark's salvation. Head down. After completing our tour of Bohr, we got back on the bus and took a quick drive through the city. We then got on the ferry to go to Sweden. What a beautiful journey. It only took 15 minutes. We've now arrived in Sweden. This is the city of Helsingborg. A running joke that the Scandinavian countries share is that it's cheaper to go outside of their own country than it is to live where they're from. Here in Helsingborg, you can find new apartments and homes being built all the time, and for the Danes, it's much cheaper to live here than in Denmark. Welcome to Skåne, the breadbasket of Sweden, home of many Viking sites that date back to the reign of Harald Bluetooth, the first form of codified law in Scandinavia in the 13th century, and once one of its most hotly contested territories in the Danish-Swedish Wars. Sweden defeated Denmark during the Second Northern War, and at its end, forced Denmark to cede the provinces of Halland, Blekinge, and lastly Skåne. What has been called one of the bloodiest battles in history between Sweden and Denmark raged outside the city of Lund, which we're visiting now, in 1676 during the Scanian War, which, if you remember, is depicted on the tapestries in the Rosenborg slot. An affair of ice, snow, pistols, and royal cavalry charges, it sealed the deal, with Skåne remaining Swedish to this day. Lund is one of the oldest cities in the south of Sweden, and you can trace its Vikingness in that the Old Norse word for Lund is grove, often attributed to sacred groves of the gods. This was our first introduction to the beautiful country of Sweden. We naturally had to try Sweden's famous ice cream, which completely merits the praise. Home to the Espresso House and Lund University, one of the finest universities in Sweden, Lund is a college town through and through. No students at this time of the summer though. The cathedral which dominates the city center is now almost 1,000 years old. One of the most distinguished Romanesque cathedrals in Denmark and Sweden, Lund Cathedral was damaged in a fire in 1234 as we can see today on its exterior. It also weathered many Reformation purges. Inside, we are met by the awe-inspiring altar and mosaic dedicated to Saint Mary and Saint Lawrence. and an astronomical clock created in the 15th century which tolls twice a day. We weren't there to see it in action, but we are told it's quite something. They say that when the clock chimes, the knights do battle at the top, and the Magi exit the clock and give gifts to the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus. This part of the clock is dedicated to showing the location of the sun and moon based on the zodiac. And this is a calendar, which may have been used for centuries to specify the dates to celebrate religious holidays. As you can see, it's very exact. The University of Lund dates back to 1666, 6 years after the Treaty of Roskilde was signed. The Kungahuset building was originally created for the Bishop of Lund, but it was donated to the university 20 years after its founding to serve as its main building and library. As a part of Sweden's concerted effort to Swedenize its new territorial acquisitions, the university was founded to draw students here and away from Köpenhavn, Köpenhamn as the Swedes would call it, into the local university. Danish Lutheran hymns were replaced with the Swedish catechism. The campus's buildings are closed to anyone but students, but it's totally okay to take a walk around the campus and also the museum nearby. To get here, I recommend taking the train from Köpenhavn. It's very easy and takes only 40 minutes to get here. Whereas Lund is famous for its sense of tradition and heritage, Malmö is the complete opposite. The third largest city in Sweden, Malmö started off as a fishing town and its name means gravel hill. Today, it's Sweden's city of technology and development. It's an art center, the home of many of Sweden's most famous bands and singers, with Eurovision hosted here in 2024. Malmö's most famous film director, Bo Widerberg, specialized in telling stories about the everyday lives of people from the working class. It's been an industrial city since the 1800s, and it's the crime capital of Sweden with one of the highest concentrations of gang violence and refugees in the country. This is the main square of the old town. While very little of the old architecture remains, the style of the old buildings is not Swedish but Danish, because like Lund, Malmö was originally Danish.
Where did you see me go? It's not the right way, you know.
As a fan of Swedish cinema, I naturally had to visit the Malmö State Theatre. We also have a good view here of St. Peter's Church, which has been here since the 14th century. It is the oldest building in Malmö. Ingmar Bergman was the director here between 1952 and 1958, and it was also where many of his actors found their start. Max von Sydow, Gunnar Lindblom, and Ingrid Thulin, to name a few. Before heading back to the bus, we took a walk in one of Malmö's many famous parks. We were hoping to check out the castle, the Malmöhus slott, which is the oldest surviving Scandinavian castle from the Renaissance, but we just didn't have enough time. The tallest building in Malmö is the Turning Torso. Completed in 2005, it is 90 meters high and was the first rotating skyscraper in the world. On the way back to Copenhagen, we crossed the Øresund Bridge, the second longest bridge in Europe at 7,845 meters total. The bridge was completed in a 4-year time span between 1995 and 1999.
Never said it was good, never said it was me. Shadow rises and you are here.
If you'd like to see more of the bridge, I'd check out the show Brand, featuring Sofia Helin and Kim Bodnia. It's a true crime series that forces policemen from Copenhagen and policemen from Malmö to work together. I won't give any more spoilers, but I will say that the bridge is prominently featured in the first episode. I ended the day by visiting Frederiksberg, starting with a solemn pilgrimage to the site of the Joan of Arc's nun school. On March 21, 1945, pilots of the British RAF accidentally bombed a girls' school full of innocent children, teachers, and nuns. The British were aiming for the Gestapo headquarters not far away, but instead killed 86 children. It was Sunday and most of the restaurants were closed. I was able to find one restaurant open, M.G. Pedersen's Family Garden. They make the most delicious cheeseburgers I've ever had, and it's one of the oldest restaurants here in Frederiksberg. It was opened in 1858. Call it a happy accident, but I decided to spend some more time in Frederiksberg. From the restaurant, I wandered over to the neighboring gardens, owned by the Danish Horticulturalist Society. This is one of the oldest greenhouses in Copenhagen. From this garden, you can cut across to the Frederiksberg Gardens. What can I say about this beautiful space? In the 19th century, Frederick VI reorganized the garden from a Baroque one into a romantic landscape one in the English style. It was not until 1885 when the public was given unrestricted access here. History aside, it's really one of the most beautiful and greenest spaces in the city. Every winter, this front entrance becomes an ice skating rink. What an idea. You can literally do anything here. Go for a jog, have a private chat with your best friend, have a picnic, sail around the canals like the royals did in the summers, and experience the bliss that Copenhageners experience every day with this combination of nature and Copenhagen's rich history. Take a peek around the corner and you will find the Copenhagen Zoo, which is right next to the gardens. Frederiksberg really is a step off the beaten path, and I truly recommend you to come here and see it. It might actually be my favorite spot in all of Copenhagen. Welcome to our 5th day in the Merchants Harbor. It was our final day in Copenhagen proper, and I decided to take a walk to Amalienborg and see all the sights along the way as the city woke up. The historic Christiansborg Palace, Denmark's modern parliament building, dates back to 1167 when Bishop Absalon constructed a castle here to protect all trade going in and out of the city. Here's a statue of Christian X, who became a symbol of national resistance during the Nazi occupation. Amalienborg, a palace of the nobility, became the home of the royal family after Christiansborg burned down in 1795. A statue of Christian V of Denmark dominates the center of the palace square. Every day at noon, you can see the changing of the guard, a grand procession, if I do say myself, and an event that seems to attract the most tourists in all of Copenhagen. What surprised me most about the Palace of Amalienborg was its presentation of the kings and queens of Denmark. Did you know that the Danish monarchy no longer uses thrones, or that Denmark doesn't do coronations? Rather, they have a simple proclamation by the current Prime Minister on the balcony of Christiansborg. Inside, I was immediately greeted by the smiling photos of Queen Ingrid and her daughters, the mannequin of our favorite tattooed sailor king, Frederick IX, in his office, not to mention his piano, his innumerable pipes, and his elephant bell. Frederick IX was an avid lover of music and famously conducted many concerts. Beneath their crowns and gowns exist real human beings. An outsider who didn't expect to be king, but rose up to the challenge ably. Not without flaws, Christian IX took 30 years to accept the direction of liberal reform in Denmark, but he made a concerted step towards progress in his final years by appointing the first liberal Prime Minister of Denmark. And in these rooms resided Louise of Hesse-Kassel, the Queen of Christian IX, a queen and her royal daughters who preserved the honor of their house through a series of royal marriages, saving Denmark's credibility in the 19th century. Christian IX and Louise's daughters, Dagmar and Alexandra, grew up in a more relaxed and open court. In their new countries, they were subjected to incessantly stressful court politics, protocols, and social upheavals. Alexandra had to suffer the ceaseless attention of her mother-in-law, Queen Victoria, and anti-Romanov discontent eventually forced Dagmar to flee from her new country for good in 1917. Nevertheless, both queens proved to be extraordinary and flexible young women in an ever-changing world. What you have here is a monarch with a rigid and militaristic exterior who started off disliking liberal reform and opposing women's suffrage, but showed he could be a symbol of resistance and courage during the darkest days of Nazi occupation. He was a Højredansk personified, and he could be moved by his most beautiful daughter-in-law, the future Queen Ingrid. Caroline Amalie famously owned a library of 2,300 books here, and she invited many literary guests to her court, including Hans Christian Andersen. What you have in Amalienborg is the approachability of Denmark's royal family. I particularly love the stories of King Frederick IX and Queen Ingrid. The two became quite popular in the post-war era, and contrary to royal custom, not only decided to stop at 3 children, but passed the 1953 Act of Succession, making it possible for their daughter, Margaret, to succeed them as Denmark's ruling queen. 2 of the most wicked monarchs in history, and that continues today with Margaret, who only this year decided to abdicate her throne and pass the scepter on to her son, Frederick X. During his last major TV interview, Denmark's most popular king, Frederik IX, remarked, "One is first and foremost oneself." I agree with that statement. Consecrated in 1894, after centuries of work, the marble church can be found right outside of Amalienborg. The exterior includes depictions of figures crucial to Danish Christianity, and the dome is the largest of its kind in Scandinavia. Denmark is one of the least religious places in the world, but walking into the church is the definition of what I would call a spiritual experience. Apparently you can go on a tour up to the dome at about 1:30 every day, but I think I was too awestruck by the dome to really notice anything else. After a wonderful morning at Amalienborg, we had some lunch at Hart Bakery before going on to Nyhavn again. Our final destination of the day was the National Museum of Denmark, where I hope to see some Viking artifacts. Their most immersive exhibit is the Viking Sorceress exhibit, and I have to say I was very impressed. They have a whole visual auditory experience, detailing Norse concepts of fate, the Norns, apocalypse, rebirth, and the power women held in society. Besides its Viking exhibition, the museum is worth seeing for its History of Denmark on 3 floors exhibition. To my knowledge, there is a larger collection dedicated to Denmark's history during the early Bronze Age and Migration Ages, eras that have been pretty much sidelined outside of Scandinavia, but are crucial parts of Denmark's story. But there simply wasn't enough time for me to see everything. We made do with the Middle Ages. In particular, the look into class strife in the 1700s and 1800s. Life in medieval and early modern Denmark, much like in the rest of Europe, was regrettably characterized by war and the monarchy's Sisyphean game of maintaining and expanding their privilege. The Reformation led to greater unification of the Danish kingdom, with the translation of a Bible that the Danish people could read, as well as a more open form of religious practice. But the church also served as a tool for the kings and queens of Denmark to establish their divine right to rule. Denmark saw a massive evolution as an agricultural nation in the 18th century, even as the everyday population suffered. Peasants in 1700s Denmark lived in self-supporting villages in the countryside. They didn't have the rights to buy more land. That power rested with the nobility, whose authority was manifested in the manor houses, which made 75 to 80% of the land in Denmark. And while new agricultural implements were introduced to Denmark in the 1750s, the peasants didn't have access to those materials. Manor landlords could operate with unlimited power over the peasants, imprisoning them at will or committing torture, the most famous method of punishment being the wooden horse, where a peasant's leg would be strapped to a granite boulder. Living conditions in the cities were also poor, with a huge disparity between the lives of the wealthy and the poor existing well into the 18th century. Conditions already made difficult by the congested streets and tight living quarters became appalling in 1711 when a plague decimated a third of the population. København was hit by a fire in 1795, and that very much was a benchmark year in København. Much of the city, mostly timber buildings, was burnt to ash, including the Christiansborg Palace. 20 years earlier, there had been a concerted effort to improve the lives of people in Denmark. A German physician, he became a favorite of King Christian VII, Struensee, brought the Enlightenment to Denmark with new reforms. Unfortunately, his laws were unpopular with the members of Denmark's ruling elite. To cap it all, he had been engaging in a highly publicized affair with the Queen of Denmark, and these charges, coupled with him being a foreigner, cost him his head in 1772. Struensee's reforms were stricken from the record, but only temporarily. Christian VII's successor, Frederick VI, passed the agricultural reform laws during the start of his reign, ensuring that the reforms brought about during Struensee's governance came to fruition. Physical punishment of peasants was abolished, as was serfdom. Peasants could own surplus goods, buy farmland, and access independent tribunals. Work rents had to be clearly defined. Educational reform began, with compulsory school attendance from the age of 5 to that of confirmation. Jews were given far more freedom in Denmark than in the rest of continental Europe combined. Although they were still barred from intermarriage with Christians, their new freedoms included access to high school and real estate. Of course, as often in the case of history, nothing would be perfect. Not all of these laws could be enforced. Frederick VI's reign was also still an absolute monarchy, but for now, Denmark was moving forward, and the evidence lies in the stone of this monument. On our final day in Denmark, we took a short train ride to Roskilde, located on Denmark's main island of Zealand. Today, Roskilde is a commuter town, 30 minutes to and from København, and a midpoint on the way to the rest of the country. Those who do not want to live in København often choose to stay here or around Roskilde. The town is more famous though for its rock festival, held 8 days every summer between the end of June and first week of July. In this way, Roskilde remains as important and well known throughout the world as it was in history. But what about its past? Denmark's national heritage can be found in Roskilde to this day. Historians speak of a 6th century king named King Roar, who predates even Harald Bluetooth. But based on what we can verify from the historical record, the city peaked in the 11th century. Roskilde, like Lund in modern-day Sweden, developed around a cathedral, and Absalon, the bishop of Roskilde and founder of København, commenced work on the cathedral we see here today, while also playing a major role in commissioning historians to tell Denmark's national story. One of these texts would be Gesta Danorum by Saxo Grammaticus. As aforementioned, Denmark is one of the most secular countries in the world, But there could be no better representation of Danish history than Roskilde Cathedral, completed in 1280, where 39 of Denmark's royal kings and queens are buried. Not to mention, each coffin is different, medieval, Baroque, and neoclassical. Each one represents shifts in Danish taste in architecture and style. Arguably the most important burial site at Roskilde Cathedral is its oldest. Margaret I, the Queen of the Kalmar Union, was entombed here in 1413. To think she left such a strong impact on this place, that ceremonies have taken place here in the hundreds of years since, all the way up until 2006, when the Tsarina Maria, Princess Dagmar of Denmark, was reinterred here. After leaving the Roskilde Cathedral, we trekked down the windy road to Roskildehavn, the Viking Ship Museum. The Viking Ship Museum remains a popular site for tourists because in 1962, archaeologists discovered 5 Viking Age ships and deduced that they had been purposely sunk in the fjord in the 1060s and 70s to protect the seaborne approach to Roskilde from enemy attack. During the Viking Age, as we like to call it, Roskilde and neighboring Lyra were hotbeds of settlement, trade, and religious activity. The art of making ships was passed from generation to generation. Through dendrochronology, archaeologists can date and locate the origins of the wood used for making these ships and form hypotheses on what most of them were used for. To this day, archaeologists at Roskilde study the art of Viking shipbuilding, using the same wood the people here would have used to build their vessels and testing their discoveries practically in the fjord. Viking life and Viking ships, Viking blood sacrifices, Viking conversion to Christianity, all themes we've talked about. It was incredible getting to see the ships inside, and actual video footage of the process they went through to recover them. Out of the 6 ships located in the main hall, this is the most well preserved of them. It was a trading vessel, and it was made of Danish oak. Built in Norway with pine, Skåne 1 was a seagoing ship capable of crossing the North Atlantic with a crew of 8 to 20 passengers and a cargo of up to 25 tons. The wood has been traced to Sognefjord, Norway, and they have recreations from the museum with wood from the same region. Skåne 6 is a rowing and sailing vessel that was the most versatile. Most often, it was used for whaling, fishing, and seal hunting. And then you have your more famous Viking coastal longship. 29 meters long, dating to around 1042, this longship was built in the vicinity of Dublin. Narrow with a crew capable of operating 60 oars at a time, it was designed for cutting through rivers with a crew of up to 100 warriors. The museum's recreation of this ship can travel at about 2.5 knots a second, with every oar manned. As ships got bigger and Roskilde's harbor became smaller, it lost importance and the capital moved to Copenhagen. Still, as is the case throughout Scandinavia, Viking ships and longships continue to inspire excitement. Before leaving, we visited a hidden gem, Lutzov's Kungshandel. The merchant's house was opened from 1892 to 1979, and it used to be an old grocery store. It is now a museum with copies of many objects sold in the 1920s. They include old candy, toys, wine and cooking utensils, old newspapers, shoes, your typical convenience store supplies. We were told that the toilet paper would have been just as valuable back then. Anybody wanting to judge an establishment's condition would have looked at their toilet paper. This spot used to be a farmyard, and farmers would come here in their horse-drawn carriages to purchase their goods. The horses would be stabled nearby, and on market days, there could have been up to 30 carts and 50 horses here. And of course they had a cinema too.
We're from the United States.
I'm originally from Taiwan.
You're from Taiwan. That's lovely. My dad has been there. It's very nice.
That's great.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
It was wonderful getting to see this place before we left, and we had a wonderful time in Roskilde.